Hello, welcome to ISAC Software Academy Linux course. In this presentation we will be covering a brief history of Linux to get an idea of where it came from and where it's heading. Linux started in Helsinki in Finland, originally created by Linus Torvalds, who was originally writing a terminal emulator which eventually, because he chose not to use any underlying operating system, became the Linux kernel and was released in 1991 to the general public. The development for the Linux kernel was done on an operating system called Minix, which, while you had access to the source code, was very restrictive, and as such, when Linus Torvalds created the Linux kernel, he chose to make it a lot less restrictive so that you could change it if you so chose, which is something we will cover a little bit more later on. To compile the Linux kernel that he created, Linus Torvalds used the GNU-C compiler, which is still the most popular choice for compiling the Linux kernel. Originally, Linux kernel was actually released with a license that restricted commercial use. However, that was changed at a later date to use the GNU GPL, or General Public License, which led Linux to be more of a free and open source movement style operating system, unlike Minix was that it was developed on. Originally, Linus Torvalds actually wanted to call Linux Freaks, as a combination of freak, free, and X, as in the X in Unix, and it would have been spelt Freax. He did consider the name Linux originally, however considered it too egotistical and dismissed it. Unbeknownst to Linus, his co-worker at the Helsinki University of Technology was the one uploading the Linux kernel, and as such actually put the project name as Linux because he did not believe that Freaks was a good name. The Linux kernel on its own is not capable of doing any functional tasks a user may want to actually achieve, and as such is paired with GNU software tools such as the GNU Compiler Collection, or GCC, the GNU-C library, or glibc, also pronounced glibc, the GNU Core Utilities, or Core Utils, the GNU Debugger, or GDB, the GNU Binary Utilities, or binutils, and finally the bash shell. GNU actually stands for GNU's Not Unix, which obviously makes it a recursive acronym. GNU was actually started in 1983 by Richard Stallman, who was endeavoring to do something similar to what Linus Torvalds was attempting as well. However, he was also working on the software tools, which he hadn't actually paired with a kernel as yet, and as such, when the Linux kernel was released, it was a natural thing to simply pair them together so that they could be used. As part of the GNU project, Richard Stallman actually created the GNU GPL, and obviously its variants of the lesser general public license and the free documentation license. As a result of the pairing of GNU and the Linux kernel, it is sometimes more correctly referred to as GNU/Linux, or simply GNU Linux. You may sometimes hear people referring to GNU, which is the same thing, however they're not pronouncing the G at the start. There are many different types of Linux, or distributions of Linux. Some people refer to these as flavors of Linux, and it all means the exact same thing. The original distributions that were released as packages were Slackware and Debian. They were both released in 1993. Slackware is the oldest surviving distribution, and as such has a mention in the Hall of Fame for Linux. However, it was always considered to be more technically challenging, and as such not as simplistic for new users when they were beginning to learn Linux and how to use it. Debian was considered considerably more user-friendly than Slackware. It is still around today. It was released only several months after Slackware. Debian's popularity became the reason that a lot of different distributions actually based themselves off of Debian itself. Originally, Linux was used with x86 for a windowing environment. However, over time, x86 became part of the X project, and as such ceased to exist on its own. The X windowing system is very commonly used in Unix as well as other derived products. However, it was never really widely used in Linux until the cessation of x86, at which point it has become the staple windowing environment on all Linux distributions. Linux also had some commercial releases through various different individuals making their own products, such as Red Hat and SUSE. Red Hat obviously is owned and released and maintained by the Red Hat company. SUSE, on the other hand, was originally developed in Germany. It was bought out by Novell in 2003. Ubuntu is based off of Debian. It was initially released in 2004. It is actually the distribution that we'll be utilizing throughout this course, and it is updated regularly on a 6-month cycle. Ubuntu is a distribution that is geared towards user friendliness, and their goal is to get as many people using and working with Linux as quickly as possible, and to that end they have made a very easy to use and intuitive interface, very simplistic installation and setup, and also have a very active online community that is more than happy to help with any issues that anybody has when trying to use, install, set up, configure, or anything else you could possibly think of to do with Ubuntu. Every 4th release of Ubuntu is also every 2 years. At that point in time, it is a long-term support or LTS release, which allows you to have 3 years of support on the desktop, and if you're using it as a server, it would be 5 years of support. However, as of Ubuntu 12.04 LTS, it has been extended to 5 years for the desktop release as well. Ubuntu was actually originally created by Canonical Ltd. Canonical releases Ubuntu as free and open source software and makes their money through technical support, and now, as of the latest versions in the 12.04 and above range, they also make money from Amazon using some adware style programs that are incorporated into their Unity graphical interface. Ubuntu is quite popular in the server market, however is the most popular desktop distribution, and as such is primarily used on desktops. While there are 2 versions, the Ubuntu distribution is primarily geared towards desktops and general home users, where ease of use are most mandatory. Ubuntu gets its packages based off of Debian's unstable branch. Ubuntu also utilizes Debian's .deb package format. As a result of this, many Debian developed applications or programs can be very easily run on Ubuntu without the need for complicated recoding or debugging procedures in most cases. However, it should be kept in mind that they are not 100% compatible, and as such, in some instances, even though the .deb package will actually be available, it will not actually run under Ubuntu. In this instance, a package management tool such as apt or Ubuntu Software Center might be the better option for obtaining that software. When Ubuntu utilizes the Debian packages, any changes that they do make are pushed back to Debian as a way of supporting Debian, and in that way also supporting themselves over the long term. In 2005, Canonical Ltd created the Ubuntu Foundation and gave initial funding of $2 million in an effort to ensure that there will always be support and development for all future versions of Ubuntu. Ubuntu attempts to keep all of the software that is packaged with it and is available to be downloaded through the Ubuntu repositories under a free software license, such as the GNU General Public License, though there are others that are applicable. This is not always possible. In the case of proprietary hardware drivers, very specifically NVIDIA graphics drivers are very difficult to get without the use of the proprietary drivers. The AMD or ATI drivers do have an open source version, however many still prefer to use the proprietary driver instead. I previously mentioned Ubuntu's Unity graphical interface, and this is actually the default graphical interface upon initial installation on a desktop. However, this can be changed to any of a number of other options to the user's preference. Ubuntu is also very popular for cloud applications, and in fact there is now support, at least developer support, for third-party cloud management platforms. As an example, those ones used at Amazon EC2. With the popularity and sheer capabilities of cloud technologies such as cloud computing, cloud storage, cloud networking, all of these are available and supported by Ubuntu in many different ways, which goes towards its overall usability and ensures a measure of future-proofing as well. As previously mentioned, Ubuntu was in fact funded by Canonical Ltd, which is a UK-based company which is owned by Mark Shuttleworth, The Unity graphical interface was originally developed for the Ubuntu Netbook Edition and was initially included into the desktop release in version 11.04. Prior to this version, the default graphical interface was actually GNOME, also pronounced as GNOME. There are also specific versions of Ubuntu that have been released that are specifically geared towards utilizing GNOME or another graphical interface known as KDE. These distributions are referred to as Kubuntu for the KDE version and Ubuntu GNOME for the GNOME version. There is also an increasingly popular distribution of Ubuntu that is based off of the desktop environment called XFCE, or commonly referred to as Xforce, that is named Xubuntu. It is designed to run more efficiently on cheaper, less complicated hardware. These are, of course, not the only variations of Ubuntu, however they are some of the more influential. All of these distributions are based around a graphical interface, and as such are more geared towards desktop installations. Server installations generally do not install a graphical interface, and therefore you'll find very few variations on Ubuntu servers. Ubuntu servers are generally operated via the command line. Quite often, in the case of servers in general, they are not used as a desktop system is with a monitor, keyboard and mouse. They are usually accessed remotely and managed in such a way that it can be done from a remote site by an engineer. In this instance, there is no need to have a graphical interface, which is why there generally isn't one. You can, of course, install one if you so chose. Ubuntu also supports and comes with many office productivity applications. These are not identical to the likes of Microsoft Office, however do give a very close approximation. In the case of LibreOffice, this actually allows you to save your files in a Microsoft Office format. There is also Firefox for web browsing, Thunderbird for emails, and many others are available. All Linux distributions are capable of running Windows applications through the use of such things as Wine, which is an acronym for Wine is not an emulator. This allows you to run Microsoft Office directly. However, you can also run virtualization software such as VMware or VirtualBox and run other operating systems within Linux itself, as you can with Microsoft Windows. This brings us to the conclusion of this lesson. I hope that you have enjoyed it. Thank you.